Welcome to the Current Buddhist. My name is Reverend Shen-Wen, and I'm a Buddhist priest in the Chan or Chinese Zen Linji tradition, which, if you're familiar with Japanese forms of Buddhism, is currently known as Rinzai. My goal with this channel is to take a look at current events and view them through my current understanding of Buddhist thought and values. I intend on taking the lessons learned from my understanding of the Four Noble Truths, the Six Perfections, the Three Pure Precepts, and other sources, and try to make them real by bringing them into our everyday lives. Zen Buddhism, in particular, is about human flourishing and overcoming suffering. And these things can only occur in this very life here and now. So if we can't take the lessons that we learn from the Dharma and apply them to our everyday lives, then we may have missed the point of our entire practice. So in this video, I'd like to talk about some of the things I've seen surrounding charitable contributions and charitable work done by the very rich, and the reaction some people have had. Many of the comments I've seen have been very negative. Treating the donation amounts as only important if they are like a big percentage of the donor's income. There have been a lot of eat the rich style comments that I've seen. I think this is an error in thought. I can't obviously speak to the motivations of these people, but I can tell you that sweeping generalizations Welcome to the Current Buddhist. My name is Reverend Shen-Wen, and I'm a Buddhist priest in the Chan or Chinese Zen Linji tradition, which, if you're familiar with Japanese forms of Buddhism, is currently known as Rinzai. My goal with this channel is to take a look at current events and view them through my current understanding of Buddhist thought and values. I intend on taking the lessons learned from my understanding of the Four Noble Truths, the Six Perfections, the Three Pure Precepts, and other sources, and try to make them real by bringing them into our everyday lives. Zen Buddhism, in particular, is about human flourishing and overcoming suffering. And these things can only occur in this very life here and now. So if we can't take the lessons that we learn from the Dharma and apply them to our everyday lives, then we may have missed the point of our entire practice. So in this video, I'd like to talk about some of the things I've seen surrounding charitable contributions and charitable work done by the very rich, and the reaction some people have had. Many of the comments I've seen have been very negative. Treating the donation amounts as only important if they are like a big percentage of the donor's income. There have been a lot of eat the rich style comments that I've seen. I think this is an error in thought. I can't obviously speak to the motivations of these people, but I can tell you that sweeping generalizations close off our ability to see the actuality of the situation that's in front of us. Instead, we end up viewing it through the lens of our preconceptions. It can be hard to see how people with that much money can be a positive impact or influence, and it can be especially hard to look past the obvious difference between their financial situation and our own. We look at the principle of not grasping, and at a cursory glance, we see the hoarding wealth that goes against that. However, it's important to remember that money is only a tool, and beyond that fact, if there's only so much money in the world, then one person hoarding it obviously takes it away and leaves less for others, which is a situation that ends with unsatisfactoriness, or what the Buddha called dukkha, in this modern money-driven world. But we forget that this is a continuum, and that the rich are on it just as well as we are. So when you start making and amassing money, you end up fearing losing that money, or discomfort, or want, or anything like that. So we hoard, and we fear it so much that we work harder and longer hours, often taking time away from our families and our lives, that we only have so much time on this earth in the first place. And we do that in the pursuit of wealth that we can't take it with us. I often imagine that if there is a heaven and a person passed away and stands before their God just to say, what did I experience in life? An 80-hour work week. I think that considering that it's all for the sake of money that you can't take with you, I think God might look at that and say, I think you missed the point a little bit. But does that necessarily mean, does having money necessarily mean that you can't be a good person? Uh, the Vimalakirti Sutra talks about Vimalakirti, who was a wealthy, very wealthy merchant. But he was also considered deeply enlightened, so much so that in a contest of wills, he beat out Mara, the Buddhist devil, and converses with bodhisattvas like Sariputra and Manjushri and surpasses them. So while that's a story from over 2,000 years ago almost, uh, it's impossible to determine whether there's any historical accuracy to any of the characters. It does open us to the possibility that one need not be in any specific situation whatsoever to attain enlightenment. That your outward circumstances don't necessarily reflect uh, or dictate your internal qualities, and that a realized mind can be found just as readily in a wealthy merchant like Vimalakirti as it can in a poor and illiterate firewood seller like the sixth patriarch Huining. Buddhism also teaches us that ethics are situational. So blanket statements can't hold up against highly complex karma, or how the intentions of any two people would never be the same, no matter how close their situations might be to one another. Uh, so we need to allow the merits of every situation that we encounter, or lack of merits in whatever situation we encounter, to express themselves as we experience them. It's also worth mentioning that regardless of a billionaire's reasons for donating money, even if it's only to get a tax break or to generate public goodwill, it still does real and measurable good. There was a recent story of a donation of about 700 million Vietnamese dong used to pay for college from a Western billionaire. In United States dollars, that's only about $30,000. But considering that it costs something like 1,000 to 2,500 US dollars per year to go to college in Vietnam, uh, it's like paying for 28 years worth of college or giving seven people their entire 4-year degree for nothing. At, and that's massive. As a percentage of income, especially for a billionaire, $30,000 might not be much of anything. But to each one of those Vietnamese students who will benefit from this, it's massive. It's incalculable almost. Even though, as a percentage of income for the donor, it might be less than if you rounded up all the times that I rounded up my change to Walmart. So this is where we need to start examining our understanding of right action. Right action, we usually think occurs after right thought and right intention, but it can actually be independent of those. It it can even be incidental or accidental. So the karma of any action is independent of our judgment of it, and it has no value until we as human beings give it value. So, for instance, consider a tsunami triggered by an undersea earthquake. All right, the earthquake is the cause, and the resultant tsunami hits an uninhabited island. This is an event that would barely even be newsworthy. You'd probably never hear of it if it happened, maybe as a quick blurb or something like that to fill airtime. Now, that karma changes significantly if that island is inhabited. The same event has occurred. The tsunami, the earthquake, all of these are without the ability to be good or evil or just or unfair. They just happen. And they were going to happen as they always were going to happen, with karma playing out the only possible way it could. Now, for Buddhists in refined practice, um, we the intention is that one step of the Eightfold Path builds on and supports all the other steps. So we try to intentionally practice right action. But even when it's accidental, the actual and measurable good someone does as a result, and the karma that comes out of that act, should not be discounted because some people, or in this case, many people's lives, were made measurably better. It's good also to remember that the prime core principle of Buddhist thought and values is dependent origination, or mutual causality. So one thing gives rise to another, and all of these things affect and are affected by one another. To visualize this, we talk about something called Indra's net, which is a network where at each intersection of the net is a jewel, and that jewel then reflects all of the other jewels in the net around it. So each jewel is reflecting each other jewel infinitely. Now, thinking about that visualization, this donation might have made it possible for a young Vietnamese student who, to go to college, who might not otherwise have been able to afford it. And then they go on and they innovate some new product or theorem that goes on to measurably impact and improve millions of lives. Now, you might look at that and say, well, what are the chances? Well, considering the fact that Vietnam has their annual income is around $227 a month, US dollars per month, and that 1 year of college is about 4 or more months of income. Um, Not only do we look at that and say, well, the chances are actually pretty good that this could measurably help someone go to school, but we don't know how complex that the karma is going to play out and whether or not such a thing is probable. But even if it's infinitesimal, the chances exist. So we also need to remember that we are not we're not immune to this causal chain. We're also part of it. These people who are, very, very rich wouldn't be rich if it weren't for us who continue to purchase their products or go to their concerts or vote for candidates who allow the system to function in a way that tends to benefit the rich disproportionately. So we are also a part of this causal chain. And the karma of all these acts, of any act in this world, is so complex that it might as well be unknowable until the results come to pass. But that's why we practice. And especially the three pure precepts of do no harm, do only good, and do good for others, but also right intent and right thought and right action. It's to set up situations where the causal conditions for goodness, for benefit, for positive action outweigh the possible negative outcomes. This is what it means to be free from karma, because we hear that a lot. The Buddha was free from karma. Um, Complete freedom from karma, especially in a world this interconnected, is impossible. However, if we choose from a place informed by the three pure precepts and by the six perfections, and we generate our actions from that place, we now start to become the authors of our karma instead of prisoners to it. So we can take an active role in this. Now, again, karma is complex, and we're going to get effects from all of the karma bouncing off all of the other karma in this world. And that's just the way that works. But we can be proactive and we can have more of an impact if we choose our actions from a place of clarity. Overall, I do believe that the rich have a responsibility socially to do more because they have more. I mean, if you have so much money that you can't possibly spend it in your life, why not use some of that money to make the lives of others better or make the world itself better? And that comes back to another Buddhist principle, that of interconnectedness. Your sorrow is my sorrow, your suffering is mine. So is your joy. And perhaps if we all remember that, and remember that we've seen and felt suffering, and that we shouldn't want that for each other as much as we don't want it for ourselves, because in truth we are not separate, we could lift up one another, thus improving the lives of all beings, incrementally at first, but eventually exponentially. And it's also worth remembering that one of Buddhism's most impactful principles is that of impermanence. It could be argued that this wealth is not just for them, but for their family, that this is their legacy, but it assumes that our ideal of how our legacy will play out will match with the reality of how it plays out. The fact is, there is no surety that our plans will ever come to fruition, or that we'd even be aware of it if it did. But we risk not doing real good now in hopefulness of doing good later on. Uh, on the subject of impermanence, especially as it pertains to worldly wealth and power, I feel that the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley perhaps illustrates it best. He says, I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survived, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level stands stretch far away. So we should be careful not to allow our preconceived notions and judgments to blind us to the actuality of the situation before us. We should be mindful that rich or poor, we're all connected, and we should compassionately work for the benefit of all beings. We live in accord with the three pure precepts and act from a place informed by them. Regardless of our station in life, we will create the conditions for good to fulfill its potential. So let us, instead of judging, be thankful for any good done in this world, regardless of its source. Ami 12.